Well, folks, it's happening. Everything I predicted 3 months ago is coming true. Deadlock is rapidly bleeding players and its days are numbered. The game that was hyped as Valve's next big thing is now on life support. The writing is on the wall and it's clear to anyone paying attention, Deadlock is dying. A few months ago, I released a video essay explaining exactly why Deadlock was doomed from the start. I pointed out the game's deeply flawed mechanics, its confused identity, and its inability to marry shooter gameplay with MOBA design. And for doing so, I became a pariah. The Deadlock community came for me with pitchforks, calling me everything from out of touch to just a hater. I was endlessly attacked, mocked, and bombarded with smug comments about how wrong I supposedly was. Well, here we are. Look at this decline. For the past few months, Deadlock has been losing an average of 10,000 to 20,000 players per week, and in just the past 2 weeks, the losses have accelerated even further. And remember all the comments telling me my video aged like milk? It turns out my video aged like a wise old man handing down timeless wisdom. Meanwhile, those people's comments aged like a horrible, rotten human corpse baking in a house with no air conditioning. But let's not focus on the past. Let's look towards the future. Today we're going to dissect why Deadlock's failure was inevitable, why I was right all along, and perhaps if there's anything that can be done to save it. Please note that I will not be rehashing points from my previous video, which explained why Deadlock's gameplay was fundamentally flawed. If you haven't yet watched that video, please go watch it now. So Deadlock is in decline. The numbers don't lie, the trend is clear, and anyone paying attention can see where this is headed. Yet despite all of this, some Deadlock fans are still deep in denial. They've resorted to increasingly absurd coping mechanisms to convince themselves, and others, that the game isn't actually failing. Let's break down some of the most common excuses being thrown around and why none of them hold up under scrutiny. The first and most popular argument is,
Deadlock is still in alpha. This is not the real release.
To that, I have to ask, do these people seriously expect players to come flooding back for the full release? In gaming, first impressions are everything. Massive numbers of players have already tried Deadlock and made up their minds about it. They're not going to give it another shot once they've already experienced what it has to offer. History backs this up. Remember Underlords? That game never left alpha, and Valve quietly abandoned it once it became clear it wasn't catching on. Why would Deadlock be any different? Then there's the excuse that
Deadlock doesn't have any of the features that keep people interested in games, like XP gain, cosmetics, battle pass.
While that's technically true, it completely misses the point. A great game doesn't need gimmicks to retain players, it just needs to be fun. Take Dota 2 as an example. It spent nearly 2 years in beta with none of those features, and during that time, its player base consistently grew. Why? Because the game itself was good enough to keep people coming back. Any game with long-term marketability doesn't rely on external systems to succeed. It retains players because the core experience is enjoyable. Deadlock, as we've seen, is not that game. Some fans are even going as far as saying,
Deadlock doesn't actually need that many players to be successful. All it takes is 12 players to run one match.
Sure, if your definition of success is barely scraping by. But Deadlock is already dipping below Team Fortress 2's player count, and we all know what happened there. Valve essentially stopped active development on TF2 because they didn't see the return on investment. People within Valve don't want to throw money at a game that's going nowhere, and Deadlock isn't giving them a reason to stick around. If the trend continues, Deadlock is likely to follow the same path as TF2, left in limbo as Valve cuts its losses. And finally, my favourite cope of them all.
If Valve could control what people see on Steam, Deadlock just needs a good marketing push.
This one is particularly laughable. Valve didn't pull that trick with Artifact or Underlords. When those games tanked, Valve didn't double down on marketing. They gave up and moved on. It's a common misconception that a bad product can be saved with enough advertising. But the reality is much harsher. If your game doesn't resonate with players, no amount of marketing can force people to like it. The market isn't a mindless hive that you can manipulate by shouting louder. If a game is unfun, shoving it in people's faces won't magically make it successful. The truth is, a great game doesn't need a massive advertising budget to succeed. It markets itself. If Deadlock were truly fun, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. It would spread through word of mouth like wildfire with no need for gimmicks or excessive promotion. But instead, we're here, watching the game bleed players while its most devoted fans cling to increasingly desperate excuses. It's time to face reality. Deadlock isn't failing because of a lack of features, marketing, or a full release. It's failing because it's not a good game. Now, while some Deadlock fans are still clinging to their coping mechanisms, there are signs that others are finally starting to wake up to reality. On certain corners of Reddit, you can see what's called a preference cascade starting to take hold. This is a phenomenon where a group suddenly changes its outward consensus on an issue, often when people feel safer voicing their true opinions. It's like when tech industry leaders suddenly started endorsing Trump all at once. What was once a taboo opinion quickly became mainstream. Take this particular Deadlock comment thread, for example. In it, you will find several users openly admitting that most of their matches end with the same thought: thank God it's over. Others have described Deadlock as downright exhausting to play. It's a far cry from the overly defensive attitude many in the community had just a few months ago, and it speaks volumes about the game's fundamental issues. When even die-hard players are saying they're relieved a match is over, it's clear the core experience isn't enjoyable. To make matters worse, the declining player base is creating a vicious cycle that's dragging the game down even further. With fewer players, matchmaking quality has taken a nosedive, leading to longer wait times and mismatched games. Naturally, this frustrates the remaining players, causing even more of them to quit. And with fewer players, matchmaking gets even worse. It's a feedback loop of doom that's nearly impossible to recover from. And it's accelerating Deadlock's downfall at an alarming rate. At this point, it's clear that Deadlock is a sinking ship. Valve is faced with a crucial decision: either salvage the wreckage and rebuild from scratch, or cut their losses and abandon the project entirely. If they want to have any hope of salvaging their reputation and some of Deadlock's potential, there's a clear path forward. But it involves making some tough, decisive choices. The most logical step? Shut Deadlock down completely. No half measures, no, we'll fix it in future updates. The game needs to be reworked entirely from the ground up. Valve should take at least a year to completely overhaul the game, using Deadlock's existing assets and some of its ideas, but reimagining it as a completely new experience with a brand new name. A fresh start would give Valve the breathing room to address the fundamental issues that have doomed Deadlock, while salvaging the parts of it that actually worked. Here's an idea for how they could redo it. Instead of forcing Deadlock into the awkward, unworkable mold of a third-person MOBA with laning and creeps, why not make it a game more akin to Team Fortress 2, Overwatch, or even the recent Marvel rivals? These games thrive on tried-and-true shooter mechanics: fast-paced action, area control, and teamwork. It was foolish to think that laning, a mechanic designed for top-down RTS-style gameplay, could ever work in a third-person action game. The result is what we've seen: a game that's exhausting and fundamentally not fun. Valve already knows the classic Team Fortress 2 formula works. Why not use it as a foundation? Make the game about ambushing enemies, controlling areas of the map, and invading enemy zones, concepts that resonate with players and have stood the test of time. If Valve still wants to innovate, they could try to retain the idea of upgrading your hero's power through items and leveling. Perhaps players could earn upgrades by getting kills or controlling objectives. It's a way to inject some fresh ideas without compromising the core gameplay loop that makes PvP shooters so engaging. If Valve insists on keeping some of Deadlock's DNA alive, they need to recognize the hard truth. Third-person manual aiming with creep laning is a dead-end concept. It doesn't work. The market has repeatedly rejected it, and Valve has the opportunity to learn from these failures and move forward. But if they can't commit to a complete overhaul, then the only reasonable option is to shut Deadlock down entirely and disband the team. Continuing to pour money and resources into this current iteration is nothing short of throwing it into a fire pit. It's a waste of time, talent, and budget. And let's not pretend this is still an alpha. The patches Valve has released over the past few months show that they actually think this iteration is acceptable. They've mostly focused on minor balance tweaks to items and heroes, completely ignoring the deeper structural problems that I pointed out in my original video. This isn't an alpha. This is a broken game dressed up in the pretense of being unfinished. And if Valve can't see that, then they're setting themselves up for even bigger failure. Ultimately, the best way forward is clear. Valve needs to admit Deadlock has failed, take the lessons learned, and apply them to something entirely new. Whether it's a polished, reimagined shooter or a bold new experiment, the only path to redemption is through a complete reset. The longer they cling to the current iteration of Deadlock, the worse it's going to get for the game, the team, and Valve's reputation. Now, we've talked about Deadlock's gameplay flaws, its dwindling player base, and the coping mechanisms of its most loyal fans. But there's a deeper question here. How did a game, this flawed, make it so far into development at a company as renowned as Valve? I think the answer lies in Valve's unusual organizational structure, which might not be the innovation it's often made out to be. For those who don't know, Valve operates with a flat hierarchy. Employees don't report to a boss or manager. Instead, the company relies on peer evaluations. Every year, employees anonymously rate their coworkers, and these evaluations help determine who stays, who gets promoted, and who gets raises. On paper, this sounds revolutionary, freeing employees from micromanagement and fostering creativity. But in practice, it's a breeding ground for dysfunction, especially on a project like Deadlock. Think about it. If your career at Valve depends on being rated positively by your peers, how likely are you to criticize the project everyone's working on? Criticism, no matter how constructive, risks putting you at odds with the group. Suddenly, you're the person rocking the boat, and that's not a good look when the people evaluating your performance are the same ones you're criticizing. It's much easier and safer to play along, nod your head, and agree with the consensus, even if deep down you know the game is flawed. This system inherently stifles dissent. Unlike a traditional workplace with a clear boss, where you might feel comfortable raising concerns to someone who holds authority and can make decisions independently, Valve's structure makes employees accountable to the crowd. And let's face it, crowds don't handle critique well. People, as a collective, are notoriously resistant to negative feedback, even when it's constructive. A good boss might welcome honest criticism for the sake of improving the product, but a group of peers? They're more likely to turn on the messenger than engage with the message. This is why I think Valve's system is just as dysfunctional as a website like Reddit can be. Look at Reddit. People who point out hard truths, like saying the emperor has no clothes, are often downvoted into oblivion, regardless of how valid their points are. Similarly, Valve's flat hierarchy discourages employees from being the person who says, "Hey, maybe this game isn't good." Because who wants to be unpopular with their entire team when their job depends on their approval? I saw this firsthand with my own critique of Deadlock. My first video was harsh, but it was honest. And what did I get for it? Ridicule. A comment section full of vitriol. A horrible likes to dislikes ratio. I was bashed relentlessly for pointing out the obvious flaws in the game, yet here we are 3 months later, and everything I said is being vindicated by reality. Imagine if I'd been a developer on Deadlock, trying to voice these concerns internally. With Valve's structure, I probably would have been labeled as not a team player and ostracized, or even quietly pushed out. Gabe Newell needs to realize that this flat hierarchy experiment isn't the utopia it's often made out to be. It's not fostering innovation. It's fostering groupthink. And when groupthink takes over, bad ideas don't get challenged. Mediocrity thrives. Projects like Deadlock slip through the cracks, unchallenged, until it's too late. This organizational structure has serious flaws, and Deadlock is a perfect example of what happens when those flaws go unchecked. Valve needs to rethink how they manage internal criticism if they want to avoid more disasters like this in the future. So here we are. Deadlock is circling the drain, Valve is scrambling for answers, and IceFrog is steering the ship straight into the iceberg. It didn't have to be this way. 3 months ago, I laid out the flaws in Deadlock clearly and thoroughly. I told the world exactly why this game was doomed to fail, and I was mocked for it. I was ignored. IceFrog, you had your chance to listen. You chose not to. And now, you're receiving a large, heaping dose of my comeuppance. I know exactly how to fix Deadlock. I have ideas, genius ideas, on how to create innovative mechanics that would not only save Deadlock, but turn it into a groundbreaking third-person shooter that could dominate the market and make millions. These aren't just tweaks or small changes. These are the kind of game mechanics that would revolutionize the genre. But guess what? I'm not sharing them. IceFrog doesn't deserve them. After completely ignoring my original video, which explicitly detailed Deadlock's fatal flaws, why should I hand over the keys to success on a silver platter? No. This is my revenge. IceFrog can watch Deadlock collapse under the weight of his arrogance. Let him flail around, patching up cracks with duct tape and balance changes, pretending this disaster can be salvaged. I won't help him. I won't save this game. He had his chance to listen, and he squandered it. Now he gets to experience what it feels like to fail spectacularly in front of everyone. That's what happens when you ignore wisdom, when you ignore me. So, Valve, IceFrog, if you're watching this and wondering how to turn things around, I'll tell you this much. The answer is out there. It's just not here. I have the innovations you need, but you'll never know what they are. Enjoy the ashes of Deadlock while I sit back, vindicated, knowing I was right all along. Some lessons are learned the hard way, and for IceFrog and Valve, this is one of them. And for the rest of you, my viewers, thank you for sticking with me. You saw the truth when the masses didn't. Together, we've witnessed Deadlock's rise and inevitable fall. If there's one thing to take away from this, it's that mediocrity cannot be disguised, no matter how much clout or reputation is behind it. Reality always wins. So that's about all I have to say. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Lizardland out.
Well, I told you once, and I told you twice. Deadlock's a disaster, but you rolled the dice. Ignored my wisdom, now look where you are. Your game's in the gutter, your dream's gone too far. IceFrog, you're gonna pay for what you've done. Ignored a genius, now your empire's come undone. The genius you mocked is the one who's won. Oh, IceFrog, you're gonna pay for what you've done. I laid it all out, every flaw, every crack. You turned a blind eye, now there's no turning back. I've got ideas that would make millions rain, but I'll die with my secrets, let you suffer in vain. IceFrog, you're gonna pay for what you've done. Ignored a genius, now your empire's come undone. You tried to keep me away, but I'm going to come. Oh, IceFrog, you're gonna pay for what you've done. In the dark of the night, while your game's in decay, I'll be dreaming of your downfall as you fade away. You thought you were untouchable, too big to fall, but now you're just a name forgotten by all. I warned you kindly, but you spat in my face.